Play us a song, monkey. The words exploded through the Manhattan penthouse like a bomb. 50 elite guests froze mid-conversation. Champagne glasses stopped halfway to lips. Maria Esperanza stood at the piano, her dark skin flushing with shame. The billionaire Richard Whitmore towered behind her, his cruel smile spreading wider. "What's wrong? Cat got your tongue." The room went deadly quiet. Designer gowns rustled as socialites shifted uncomfortably. Maria's hands trembled above the pristine white keys. Her uniform felt like a target painted on her back. Whitmore leaned closer, his voice dripping venom. "I said play. Or are you too stupid to understand English?" The piano bench felt like a trap. Every eye watched her humiliation unfold. Have you ever been pushed so far that rage became your only choice? 6 hours earlier, Maria Esperanza's alarm buzzed at 4:30 a.m. in her cramped Bronx apartment. The sound echoed off water-stained walls that hadn't seen fresh paint in a decade. She rolled out of bed, her joints protesting after 15 years of scrubbing floors and polishing furniture. The tiny kitchen smelled like instant coffee and broken dreams. Maria filled her chipped mug, the same one she'd used since Sophia was born. Through the thin walls, she could hear her neighbor's baby crying. Mrs. Rodriguez worked her night shift again. In the corner of the living room sat her most prized possession, a 1970s Baldwin piano, its mahogany finish worn smooth by decades of use. Sheet music lay scattered across the top, yellowed with age. Chopin, Beethoven, Mozart, names that once meant everything to her. Maria's fingers traced the keys without pressing them. Silent practice. She'd learned to play without sound years ago when the neighbors complained about the noise. Her daughter Sophia slept just 10 feet away in their shared bedroom. The morning light filtered through grimy windows, casting shadows across the piano bench. Maria remembered sitting here at 3 in the morning, composing melodies for her master's thesis at Juilliard, back when the world seemed full of possibilities. That was 20 years ago. The acceptance letter still hung in a frame above the piano. "Congratulations, Ms. Esperanza. We are pleased to offer you admission to our Master of Music program in piano performance." She'd cried for 3 hours the day it arrived. But dreams don't pay medical bills. Sophia stirred in the bedroom. 16 years old with her father's eyes and her mother's stubborn streak. The girl who made every sacrifice worthwhile. The girl whose heart condition required surgery that cost more than Maria made in 2 years. "Morning, Mama." Sophia appeared in the doorway, her school uniform wrinkled from sleep. She moved carefully, never running, never playing sports like other kids. The doctors said her heart couldn't handle the strain. "Morning, mi amor." Maria poured orange juice into Sophia's favorite glass, the one with cartoon characters that should have been replaced years ago. "How are you feeling?" "Good." Sophia always said good things. Even when the chest pains kept her up all night. Even when she couldn't climb the stairs at school without stopping to rest. Maria watched her daughter eat cereal, counting each spoonful. The surgery was scheduled for next month. Dr. Peterson had been patient about the payment plan, but patience had limits. "I have to work late tonight," Maria said, washing dishes in the rust-stained sink. "There's leftover rice in the fridge." "Another fancy party?" "Something like that." Sophia nodded. She understood that fancy parties meant extra hours, extra pay. Money that would help fix her heart. Maria caught the 6:15 bus to Manhattan, pressed between construction workers and office cleaners. The city transformed during the 40-minute ride. Crumbling projects gave way to glass towers. Chain-link fences became marble facades. The Whitmore penthouse occupied 3 floors of a building that cost more than her entire neighborhood. Maria had been cleaning it for 15 years. She knew every room, every expensive vase, every Persian rug that cost more than most people's cars. Richard Whitmore inherited his wealth at 25. His grandfather built the real estate empire. His father expanded it. Richard just collected the profits and hosted parties to show off his good fortune. Maria unlocked the service entrance with her key. The familiar smell of wealth hit her. Leather furniture. Fresh flowers are replaced daily, the faint scent of money itself. She started in the kitchen, polishing granite countertops that already gleamed. Every surface had to be perfect. Every glass is spotless. Whitmore inspected her work like a drill sergeant, always finding something wrong. The living room stretched 40 feet from wall to wall. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered views of Central Park. In the center sat the piano. A Steinway Model D concert grand, jet black and beautiful. Maria paused her dusting to stare at it. She'd polished those keys 1,000 times, careful never to press them. Whitmore's piano teacher came twice a week to give him lessons he didn't deserve. The man had no ear for music, no soul for it either. She'd heard him butcher Chopin nocturnes, turning poetry into noise. Her phone buzzed, a text from Dr. Peterson's office. Payment reminder, surgery deposit due in 30 days. 30 days. $6,000. Maria calculated quickly in her head. Even with overtime, even with the extra party tonight, she'd be short. The front door opened. Whitmore's voice echoed through the apartment. "Maria, where are you?" She hurried to the foyer, duster still in hand. "Yes, Mr. Whitmore." He stood in his tailored suit, checking his Rolex. "I'm having guests tonight. Important people. The place needs to be immaculate." "Of course, sir." "And Maria?" His eyes narrowed. "Stay out of the way once people arrive. I don't want the help to be visible." The help. 15 years of cleaning his home, and she was still just the help. "Yes, sir." He disappeared into his office, already on his phone, making deals worth more money than Maria would see in a lifetime. She returned to dusting, her movements mechanical. Polish the silver, vacuum the Persian rugs, arrange the flowers that would die and be replaced tomorrow. But her eyes kept drifting to the piano. Juilliard felt like another lifetime. Professor Williams encouraged her to audition for the New York Philharmonic. Fellow students called her the best pianist in their class. The standing ovation after her senior recital. Then reality hit. The music world was small, competitive, and not always welcoming to a young black woman from the Bronx. Job interviews that went nowhere. Auditions where she played brilliantly and watched white pianists get hired instead. Bills piled up. Sophia needed food, clothes, and a safe place to live. Dreams became luxuries Maria couldn't afford. The cleaning job at Whitmore's was supposed to be temporary, just until she found her footing in the music world. 15 years later, she was still wiping down his counters. Her phone rang. Sophia's school. "Miss Esperanza?" "Sophia had another episode during gym class. She's fine, but we think you should know." Another episode. Another reminder that time was running out. Maria hung up and stared at the piano again. Those keys held her past and Sophia's future. Tonight, 50 wealthy guests would gather around it, listening to Whitmore's clumsy playing. None of them would know that the maid polishing their glasses had once been destined for concert halls. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, illuminating the keyboard like a spotlight. Maria's fingers twitched, muscle memory yearning to touch those keys one more time. But not yet. Tonight would be different. Tonight, something will change. She could feel it in her bones. Richard Whitmore adjusted his Armani cufflinks as he surveyed his kingdom. At 55, he commanded a real estate empire worth $3 billion. Every building in his reflection belonged to him. Every person in his penthouse owed their presence to his generosity. He stood 6 feet tall, silver hair perfectly styled, jaw sharp enough to cut glass. His tailor-made suit cost more than most people earned in 6 months. Everything about him screamed power, from his Italian leather shoes to the Patek Philippe watch that ticked against his wrist. The penthouse filled with New York's elite, city councilmen, federal judges, CEOs whose companies shaped global markets. They came when Richard called because his donations bought influence, and his influence opened doors. "Richard!" Senator Morrison approached with his wife, both beaming like they'd won the lottery. "Magnificent party as always." "Only the best for my friends," Richard replied, his smile cold and calculated. He shook hands like a politician, a firm grip designed to remind people who held the power. His guests clustered around him like moths to flame. They laughed at his mediocre jokes, applauded his business victories, pretended his political opinions were brilliant insights rather than inherited prejudices. Richard thrived on their attention. These people validated his superiority, confirmed what he'd always believed: some humans were simply born better than others. Maria moved through the crowd carrying champagne, invisible to most guests. Richard watched her with the detached interest of a man observing livestock. She'd served his family for 15 years, reliable as clockwork, quiet as furniture. "Excuse me." Richard snapped his fingers at Maria like summoning a dog. "The Krug needs replacing." She nodded silently, disappearing toward the kitchen. Richard's friends barely noticed the interaction. Servants weren't people to them. They were appliances with legs. "Richard, tell us about the downtown development," Judge Patterson requested, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to being heard. Richard's chest puffed with pride. 40-story mixed-use complex, prime real estate. We'll clear out the current tenants, renovate, and triple the property values." "What about the families living there?" asked Patterson's wife, her concern performative. Richard waved dismissively. "Section 8 housing. They'll find somewhere else." The casual cruelty rolled off his tongue like discussing the weather. Displacing poor families meant nothing to him. They existed to make his life more comfortable, then disappear when inconvenient. His grandfather had taught him well. "Money talks, Richard. Everything else is just noise." 3 generations of Whitmores had built their fortune on that philosophy. Buy low, sell high, and never let sentiment interfere with profit. The family coat of arms should have been a $sign. Richard's father had added his own wisdom. "Never let them think they're equal to you, son. Give them an inch, they'll take a mile." Those lessons shaped Richard's worldview. Workers were tools. Servants were property. Anyone without money was less human than him. He surveyed his guests again, counting the judges, the politicians, the business leaders. Each relationship was an investment. Each favor granted came with interest attached. Power was currency, and Richard was the Federal Reserve. "Maria," he called across the room, not caring who heard. "Where's that champagne?" She appeared instantly, tray in hand, refilling glasses with practiced efficiency. Richard noticed how she avoided eye contact, how her shoulders hunched slightly when he spoke. Good. Respect should look like fear. His piano dominated the far corner, its polished surface reflecting the chandelier light. Richard had purchased it for $12 million at auction. Not because he loved music, but because owning something so expensive sent a message. "Richard," called his oldest friend, Charles Pemberton III, "give us a tune." The crowd murmured agreement. They'd endured Richard's playing before, clapping politely while he butchered classics their children learned in elementary school. Richard cracked his knuckles theatrically. "What would you like to hear?" "Anything!" shouted someone from the back. He sat at the piano bench, adjusting his suit jacket. The keys felt cold under his fingers. He'd been taking lessons for 3 years but approached music like a business transaction. Technique without soul, notes without emotion. He began Für Elise, Beethoven's most recognizable piece. His timing was off. His dynamics are non-existent. What should have been beautiful became mechanical, lifeless. But his guests applauded anyway. They always did. Richard finished with a flourish, standing to acknowledge their fake enthusiasm. This was how the world should work. Him performing, others appreciating, everyone knowing their place. Maria stood near the wall, polishing a silver tray that already gleamed. Richard caught her expression for just a moment. Something flickered across her face. Disapproval? Pain? The audacity shocked him. A maid, judging him, in his own home. Richard's jaw tightened. His eyes narrowed. 15 years of faithful service meant nothing if she couldn't show proper respect. Time to remind her who was boss. Time to put her back in her place. Richard noticed Maria's expression during his piano performance. That subtle flinch when he missed the crescendo. The way her jaw tightened when he butchered Beethoven's delicate phrasing. The audacity burned in his chest like acid. "Maria!" he called out, his voice cutting through the polite applause. "Come here." The conversations around the room quieted. 50 pairs of eyes turned toward the maid standing frozen by the wall. Her silver tray reflected the chandelier light as her hands trembled slightly. She approached slowly, each step measured and careful. "Yes, Mr. Whitmore." Richard remained seated at the piano, his fingers still resting on the keys. His smile was sharp enough to draw blood. "You seemed distracted during my performance." The room fell completely silent. Senator Morrison exchanged glances with Judge Patterson. This was about to become entertainment of a different kind. "I was working, sir," Maria replied quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Working. Richard savored the word like expensive wine. "Yes, that's what you do, isn't it? Work, clean, serve." His guests shifted uncomfortably. Some pulled out their phones, sensing drama unfolding. Richard stood slowly, every movement deliberate. "Tell me, Maria, in your extensive experience cleaning my piano, have you ever wondered what it would sound like if someone with actual talent played it?" The question hung in the air like a loaded gun. Maria's knuckles went white around her tray. "I wouldn't know, sir." "Wouldn't you know?" Richard's eyebrows shot up in mock surprise. 15 years in this apartment? And you've never been curious about music? Charles Pemberton chuckled nervously. "Richard, perhaps we should—" "No, no," Richard waved him off, his eyes never leaving Maria. "I'm genuinely curious. Our devoted maid has been polishing this $200,000 instrument for years. Surely she has opinions about music." Maria's breathing became shallow. She felt the weight of every stare, the heat of every spotlight. This was a trap, and they both knew it. "Music isn't for people like me," she said finally. Richard's grin widened. He'd been hoping for exactly that response. "People like you," he repeated slowly, letting each word drip with condescension. "And what kind of people would those be, Maria?" The racial undertone was subtle but unmistakable. Several guests looked away, suddenly fascinated by their champagne glasses. "Working people," Maria answered carefully. "Ah, but music is for everyone, isn't it?" Richard gestured grandly to his audience. "That's what they teach in those public schools, right? Everyone can be an artist. Everyone has talent." His voice grew louder, more theatrical. "In fact, I bet you think you could play this piano better than me." The accusation hit like a physical blow. Maria's spine straightened. "I never said that." "But you thought about it." Richard circled her like a shark. "I saw your face during my performance. That little frown, that disapproval." Judge Patterson's wife whispered something to her husband. A city councilman checked his watch, looking for an escape route. "I don't think anything, Mr. Whitmore. I just clean." "Just clean," Richard nodded sagely. "Just clean, just serve, just exist quietly in the background. But tonight, Maria, I want to give you a gift." He gestured toward the piano with flourish. "I want to let you try." The words hit the room like a bomb. Maria's tray slipped from her hands, clattering against the marble floor. Champagne glasses scattered, crystal fragments catching the light. "Sir, I—" "Play something," Richard commanded, his voice booming across the penthouse. Anything. Show my guests what 15 years of dusting a concert grand piano has taught you. The crowd pressed closer, forming a semicircle around the piano. Phone cameras emerged from designer purses. Social media influencers sensed viral content brewing. I don't play piano, Maria said, but her voice lacked conviction. Of course you don't. Richard's laugh was cruel and sharp. People like you don't play. You listen. You serve. You watch from the sidelines while your betters create art. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that still carried across the silent room. Unless you're afraid. The challenge hung in the air like smoke. Maria's heart pounded against her ribs. Every guest waited for her response. Every phone camera recorded her humiliation. This was the moment Richard had orchestrated. The public breakdown. The confirmation that servants should know their place. Afraid of what? Maria asked quietly. Afraid of proving you're exactly what I think you are. Richard's smile was pure venom. A cleaning lady who thinks she's better than she is. The insult landed perfectly. Maria felt it in her bones, in her soul, in the dreams she'd buried for 15 years. Senator Morrison cleared his throat. Richard, maybe this isn't... She can walk away, Richard interrupted. Admit she's just the help and go back to polishing silver. He turned to face his guests, arms spread wide. Or she can sit at my piano and embarrass herself in front of 50 of New York's most important people. The room held its breath. Every eye focused on Maria. Every camera waited for her decision. Walk away and stay invisible. Or step forward and risk everything. Maria stared at the piano. The black surface reflected her face like a dark mirror, showing every line of exhaustion, every year of compromise. 15 years of silence. 15 years of hiding who she really was. Her mind raced. Walking away meant keeping her job, Sophia's surgery, the rent money, everything practical and safe. But staying meant something else entirely. The room waited. 50 wealthy faces watched her internal war. Phone cameras captured every moment of her hesitation. Richard's smirk widened. He thought he'd won already. Maria closed her eyes. Suddenly she was 22 again, standing on the Juilliard stage for her senior recital. Professor Williams in the front row, nodding encouragement. The piano is waiting like an old friend. Music doesn't care about your background, he'd told her after that performance. It only cares about your soul. Her soul had been buried under years of scrubbing floors and swallowing pride. But it wasn't dead. Sophia's face flashed in her mind. Her daughter, who believed her mother was extraordinary even when the world said otherwise. Sophia, who needed surgery, but also needed to see that dreams don't always die. Maria opened her eyes. Richard was still talking, still performing for his audience. Exactly what I expected. All talk, no substance. Some people are born to serve and I'll play. The words cut through his monologue like a blade. Richard's mouth snapped shut. Excuse me? Maria stepped forward. Her legs felt shaky, but her voice grew stronger. I said, I'll play. The room erupted in whispers. Phones shifted to better angles. This was about to become very interesting. Richard's confidence flickered for just a moment. Then his smile returned, sharper than before. Excellent. What will you butcher for us tonight? Maria walked toward the piano bench. Each step felt like walking through fire. The keys seemed to glow under the chandelier light. She sat down slowly, her worn uniform a stark contrast to the pristine instrument. Her hands trembled as she adjusted the bench height. Richard leaned against the piano's edge, arms crossed. We're waiting. Maria placed her fingers on the keys. The ivory felt cool, familiar, like coming home after a long journey. She looked up at Richard one last time. Music is the language of the soul, Mr. Whitmore. Her voice was quiet but steady, not the voice of a maid anymore. The voice of a musician. Richard's smirk faltered. Something in her tone, in her posture, had shifted. Maria turned back to the keyboard. Time to remember who she really was. Maria's fingers hovered above the keys like a pianist preparing for Carnegie Hall. The room held its collective breath. 50 phones recorded. 50 pairs of eyes waited for her humiliation. Richard stood beside the piano, arms crossed, victory already written across his smug face. He adjusted his Rolex, checking the time like this embarrassment had a schedule. Then Maria began. The first note of Moonlight Sonata whispered from the Steinway, soft as velvet, pure as starlight. Her right hand carried the melody while her left hand provided the gentle accompaniment that Beethoven had crafted for lovers and dreamers. But something was wrong with Richard's script. The note was perfect. Not good. Perfect. The room went quiet. Not the expectant quiet from before, but something deeper. Sacred. The kind of silence that falls over cathedrals. Maria's posture straightened like a flower turning toward sunlight. Her shoulders relaxed. Her worn uniform seemed to fade away as 20 years of muscle memory awakened in her fingers. This was where she belonged. This was who she'd always been. The melody flowed from her hands like liquid silver. Each phrase breathed with life, with emotion that most pianists spent decades learning to convey. Her touch was gossamer light, yet somehow filled the massive penthouse with sound that seemed to come from the instrument's very soul. Richard's smirk began to fade. The first movement of Moonlight Sonata wasn't technically difficult, but Maria's interpretation was extraordinary, professional. The notes didn't just play. They sang. They wept. They hoped. Judge Patterson leaned forward, his champagne glass forgotten in his hand. His wife stopped whispering. Senator Morrison's eyebrows climbed toward his hairline as recognition dawned. This wasn't amateur hour. This was conservatory-level playing. "My God," whispered Charles Pemberton III to his wife. "She's actually good." Good was an understatement rapidly becoming insulting. Maria finished the opening movement's haunting final phrases and paused. Her hands lifted from the keys for just a moment, fingers poised like a conductor before the orchestra's entrance. When she began again, she'd shifted into something entirely different. Chopin's revolutionary etude in C minor, Opus 10, number 12. The left hand exploded into cascading runs that sounded like cannons firing, while the right hand sang the passionate, patriotic melody. This wasn't parlor music anymore. This was virtuosity. Her fingers flew across the keyboard with precision that made the piano sing like an entire Polish army marching toward freedom. The technical demands were staggering. Rapid scales that most pianists practiced for months. Complex voicing that required independence between hands that few musicians ever achieved. Maria navigated it all like she was born to it, which, of course, she was. Richard took a step back, then another. His face had gone pale. His mouth opened slightly like a man watching his house burn down. This wasn't possible. Maids didn't play like this. Cleaning ladies didn't have techniques that would impress Juilliard professors. But the evidence sang from every note, undeniable as sunrise. The music filled every corner of the penthouse, spilling out onto the terrace, probably audible 3 floors down. Complex harmonies that most pianists spent years mastering poured from Maria's hands like she was channeling Chopin's ghost. City Councilman Bradley had played piano in college. His jaw dropped as Maria navigated passages he remembered struggling with for months. "She's better than my conservatory teacher," he muttered to his companion. The revolutionary etude built to its thunderous climax, patriotic fervor exploding from the keys and cascades of notes that seemed to shake the crystal chandelier. Then it resolved into gentle triumph, the musical equivalent of victory after great sacrifice. But Maria didn't stop there. Without pause, barely allowing the echo to fade, she transitioned into Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C-sharp minor. The funeral march opening sent chills through the audience. This piece required not just technical skill, but emotional maturity. The ability to make listeners feel death and resurrection in 4 minutes of music. The opening chords were somber as graveyards, heavy as coffins. Maria's left hand pounded out the dark, repetitive theme while her right hand began to weave in counter-melodies that spoke of loss and memory. Richard stumbled backward until his legs hit a chair. He sank into it, his carefully styled hair now disheveled from running his hands through it. This was impossible. He'd hired her 15 years ago, checked her references, background check. She was just a maid from the Bronx with a high school education, but the evidence was undeniable. Maria Esperanza wasn't just playing these pieces. She was inhabiting them, making them her own, bringing interpretations that revealed depths in the music that Richard had never heard before. The audience began to understand they were witnessing something rare. Phone cameras still recorded, but the people holding them had forgotten about social media likes and viral videos. They were too mesmerized to think about anything but the music filling their souls. Senator Morrison's wife wiped tears from her eyes. "Who is she?" she whispered to her husband, but he couldn't answer. He was too busy questioning everything he thought he knew about class and talent and worth. Judge Patterson was thinking the same thing. He'd heard performances at Carnegie Hall, at the Metropolitan Opera. This was that caliber. This was world-class artistry happening in a private apartment, performed by a woman who'd been invisible to them for years. The Rachmaninoff moved through its developmental section, Maria's hands dancing across the keys with athletic grace. The middle section required enormous technical skill, rapid scales, complex rhythms, voicing that challenged even professional pianists. She executed it flawlessly while somehow making it sound effortless. Richard's hands were shaking now. His Armani suit felt like it was suffocating him. His carefully constructed worldview was crumbling with every note. If Maria could play like this, what else had he been wrong about? What other assumptions had he made based on skin color and social class and job titles? How many other geniuses had he overlooked because they didn't fit his narrow definition of worth? The Rachmaninoff concluded in triumph. The funeral march transformed into a resurrection celebration. The final chords rang out like church bells announcing Easter morning. But Maria's hands never left the keys. She was in complete control now, the master of her domain, the queen of her instrument. The next piece she chose made several guests gasp with recognition and anticipation. La Campanella by Franz Liszt. The showpiece, the Mount Everest of piano literature, the piece that separated amateurs from professionals, professionals from virtuosos. Most concert pianists avoided this piece because it was so technically demanding it could destroy careers. The rapid octaves, the impossible leaps across the keyboard, the lightning-fast scales that required fingers to move faster than hummingbird wings. Maria attacked it fearlessly. Her right hand began the famous bell-like melody in the upper register, each note crystal clear despite the blazing tempo. Her left hand provided rhythmic support and harmonic foundation, but this was just the warm-up. As the piece developed, the technical demands multiplied exponentially. Scales that spanned the entire keyboard, octave passages that could cause injury if played incorrectly, leaps that required split-second timing and absolute precision. Maria handled it all with the confidence of a master craftsman. Her hands moved with mechanical precision, yet somehow maintained the musical soul that transformed technique into art. The audience was transfixed. Several guests had stopped breathing entirely. This wasn't just a musical performance. This was athletic artistry, like watching an Olympic gymnast perform a perfect routine. Richard had gone completely white. His mouth hung open like a broken door. Everything he believed about superiority and inferiority was being demolished by a woman he'd treated like furniture for 15 years. Charles Pemberton III, who'd studied music at Yale and considered himself knowledgeable about classical performance, was shaking his head in disbelief. "This is impossible," he murmured. "She's playing like she's been concertizing for decades." Because, of course, she should have been. The music built to La Campanella's breathtaking finale. Maria's hands moved so fast they blurred, yet every note was crystal clear, perfectly articulated, musically meaningful. The piano seemed to sing with voices from heaven, bells from paradise, angels announcing something miraculous. The final cascade of notes rushed toward the conclusion like water over a cliff. Maria's face glowed with concentration and pure joy. This was why she'd spent 4 years at Juilliard. This was why Professor Williams had called her the most naturally gifted student he'd taught in 30 years. This was who she'd always been, underneath the uniform and the silence and the years of necessary invisibility. The piece reached its climactic final measures, impossible technical passages that would challenge any pianist alive. Maria played them like she was born for this moment, like every difficulty was just another language she spoke fluently. Then, the final chord. It rang out across the penthouse like a bell announcing revolution. Then, silence. Complete, absolute silence that felt like the world holding its breath, like time itself had stopped to process what had just happened. Maria's hands remained on the keys for a long moment. Her chest rose and fell as she caught her breath. Sweat beaded on her forehead from the physical demands of what she'd just accomplished. Slowly, she lifted her head and looked at the audience. 50 faces stared back at her in shock, awe, and something approaching reverence. Richard sat frozen in his chair, his mouth hanging open like a fish pulled from water. The silence stretched on and on. Then, from the back of the room, someone began to clap. Judge Patterson started the applause, slow, deliberate clapping that echoed through the stunned silence like gunshots. His wife joined him. Then Senator Morrison. Then Charles Pemberton III, his Yale music education finally useful for something meaningful. Within seconds, the entire room erupted in thunderous applause. Not polite party clapping. Real appreciation. The kind reserved for world-class artists. The kind Richard had never earned despite years of trying. Several guests jumped to their feet. "Brava!" shouted City Councilman Bradley from near the windows. "Magnificent!" called Senator Morrison's wife, tears still streaming down her cheeks. "Extraordinary!" Judge Patterson's voice boomed over the applause. "Absolutely extraordinary!" Maria remained seated at the piano, overwhelmed by the response. Her hands trembled slightly as she absorbed 15 years of suppressed recognition flooding over her all at once. The applause continued, growing louder. Phone cameras swung away from Maria toward Richard, capturing his stunned expression for posterity. His face had gone from pale to crimson, embarrassment and shock warring for control of his features. Charles Pemberton III approached the piano, still clapping. "Maria, that was... I studied music at Yale. I've never heard Liszt played with such perfection." "How long have you been performing professionally?" Senator Morrison's wife asked breathlessly. Maria looked up at the faces surrounding her. These same people had ignored her for years, treated her like furniture, and acted as though she didn't exist. Now they gazed at her with respect, admiration, even awe. "I graduated from Juilliard 20 years ago," Maria said quietly. "Masters in piano performance." The revelation hit the room like a second bomb. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Juilliard, the most prestigious music school in America, the place that produced the world's greatest musicians. "Juilliard?" Judge Patterson's eyebrows shot up. "You have a master's degree from Juilliard?" "Magna cum laude," Maria confirmed. Richard's world tilted on its axis. A Juilliard graduate. A master's degree. 20 years of conservatory-level talent wasted on cleaning his toilets because he'd never bothered to see her as human. "But how," Charles stammered, How did you end up cleaning houses? Maria's smile was sad but not bitter. Dreams don't pay for heart surgery. She gestured toward her worn uniform, then toward the piano that had revealed her true self. My daughter needs an operation. I needed work that paid immediately, not auditions that might pay eventually. The room fell quiet again, but this silence carried weight, understanding, shame. City Councilman Bradley stepped forward. What's your daughter's condition? Congenital heart defect. She needs surgery next month. Senator Morrison pulled out his phone. Dr. Castellanos at Mount Sinai is the best pediatric cardiac surgeon on the East Coast. I'm calling him now. The Pediatric Heart Foundation, added Judge Patterson's wife. I'm on the board. We can cover the entire cost. Richard watched his guests rally around Maria like she was their discovered treasure instead of his discarded servant. The power dynamic had completely reversed. They were treating her like royalty while barely acknowledging his presence. Richard, Charles Pemberton's voice cut through the supportive chaos surrounding Maria. How long has she been working for you? The question felt like an accusation. Every eye turned toward Richard, waiting for his answer. 15 years, he mumbled. 15 years. Charles repeated the words slowly, letting their weight settle over the room. A Juilliard graduate, a master pianist, working as your maid for 15 years. The judgment in his voice was unmistakable. Several guests shook their heads in disgust. Maria stood up from the piano bench, straightening to her full height. For the first time in 15 years, she looked Richard directly in the eyes without flinching, without deference, without fear. The room held its breath. Music doesn't need credentials to prove itself, Mr. Whitmore, she said, her voice carrying clearly across the silent penthouse. It only needs a soul that's willing to tell the truth. The mic drop line hit like lightning, simple, elegant, devastating. Richard's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Everything he'd built his identity on, his inherited wealth, his social position, his assumed superiority, crumbled in the face of genuine talent and quiet dignity. Maria had won without raising her voice, without attacking him, without stooping to his level. She'd simply revealed who she really was. And in doing so, she'd shown everyone exactly who he was, too. The transformation in the room was immediate and complete. Maria was no longer the invisible maid. She was the evening star, surrounded by New York's most influential people, treating her like the artist she'd always been. Maria, Senator Morrison approached with his phone still in hand. I just spoke with Dr. Castellanos. He's clearing his schedule for your daughter's surgery. No charge. Judge Patterson's wife stepped forward, her designer purse already open. The Pediatric Heart Foundation will cover all related expenses. Hospital stays, medications, rehabilitation, everything. Maria's eyes filled with tears. 15 years of worry about Sophia's medical bills evaporated in minutes. I don't know what to say. Say you'll perform at our charity gala next month, Charles Pemberton III interjected. Lincoln Center. We've been looking for a featured soloist. Lincoln Center? Maria's voice caught. That had been her dream venue since she was a student. $5,000 for a 20-minute performance, Charles continued. Plus, I guarantee it will lead to more bookings. The music world needs to hear you play. City Councilman Bradley pulled out his business card. My wife runs the Manhattan School of Music's adult education program. We need a piano instructor. The position pays $60,000 annually, plus benefits. $60,000. More than double what Richard paid her for scrubbing his floors. The New York Times music critic is a personal friend, added Judge Patterson. I'm calling him tonight. This performance needs to be documented. Richard stood frozen in the corner, watching his guests orbit around Maria like planets around the sun. These were his friends, his network, his carefully cultivated social circle. Now they treated him like furniture while elevating the woman he'd humiliated. "Maria," Senator Morrison's wife approached with tears in her eyes. "I owe you an apology. We all do. We've seen you in this apartment for years and never really saw you." Others murmured agreement. Nods of shame and acknowledgement rippled through the crowd. "That's not necessary," Maria began. "It absolutely is," Judge Patterson interrupted. "Talent like yours should never be hidden. We failed you by not looking past your job title." The moral weight of their collective blindness settled over the room like fog. These educated, cultured people had missed genius because it wore a maid's uniform. Maria's phone buzzed, a text message. She glanced at the screen and smiled. "My daughter," she explained to the group. "She's watching the live stream someone posted. She says she's proud of me." The mention of Sophia refocused everyone's attention on what really mattered. This wasn't just about missed opportunities. This was about a mother sacrificing her dreams so her child could live. Charles Pemberton pulled out his checkbook. "The first Lincoln Center payment. Consider it an advance." He handed Maria a check. $5,000. More money than she'd ever seen at once. "I can't accept this," Maria protested. "You're not accepting charity," Charles smiled. "You're accepting payment for services to be rendered. This is business." Senator Morrison stepped forward. "My daughter graduates from Juilliard next spring. Would you consider giving her lessons? I'll pay whatever you charge." "I'd be honored," Maria replied, still processing how completely her life had changed in 30 minutes. Judge Patterson approached with his wife. "Maria, we need to address the elephant in the room." Everyone turned toward Richard, who had been trying to make himself invisible. "Richard!" Judge Patterson's voice carried the authority of someone used to delivering verdicts. "You need to apologize." The penthouse fell silent. All eyes focused on the man who'd orchestrated this evening as entertainment and instead created his own public humiliation. Richard's face was crimson. His hands shook slightly. He looked around the room at faces that had once hung on his every word. Now they looked at him with disappointment, even disgust. He started, then stopped. His voice cracked like a teenager's. 15 years, Charles Pemberton said quietly. 15 years of treating a master musician like she was beneath you." Richard looked at Maria, who stood surrounded by people offering her the respect and opportunities she'd always deserved. Her dignity in this moment made his behavior look even more shameful. "Maria," Richard's voice was barely above a whisper. I apologize. I was wrong. Completely wrong." The apology hung in the air. Inadequate, but necessary. Maria nodded graciously. "Thank you, Mr. Whitmore." She didn't elaborate, didn't lecture him, didn't twist the knife. Her restraint made her seem even more dignified by comparison. "There's something else," Judge Patterson announced. "Richard, Maria will obviously need to transition from her current position. I suggest a generous severance package and excellent references." It wasn't really a suggestion. It was a politely phrased order from people who could destroy Richard's business relationships with a few phone calls. "Of course," Richard mumbled. "Whatever she needs." Maria looked around the room at her transformed future. Sophia's surgery was funded, a teaching position waiting, performance opportunities at venues she'd only dreamed of, respect from people who mattered in the music world. The American dream, delayed by 15 years, but finally arriving. "Thank you all," she said simply. "Music brought us together tonight. I hope it always does." 6 months later, Maria Esperanza walked onto the Lincoln Center stage in a black concert gown, not a maid's uniform. The spotlight found her as she approached the same model Steinway that had changed her life that night in Richard's penthouse. Sophia sat in the front row, her heart surgery successful, her smile radiant. The operation had gone perfectly. funded by people who finally saw Maria's worth. The audience of 2,000 fell silent as Maria began to play. The same Chopin revolutionary etude that had shattered Richard Whitmore's assumptions. But tonight, it wasn't about proving herself. It was about sharing the gift she'd carried in silence for too long. In the back of the concert hall, a familiar figure slipped quietly into an empty seat. Richard Whitmore had come to hear what he'd almost destroyed. His business empire remained intact, but his social circle had never quite forgiven him. Some lessons cost more than money. As Maria's fingers danced across the keys, the music told a story that transcended class, race, and circumstance. It spoke of dreams deferred but never dead, of talent that survives regardless of recognition, of dignity that can't be stripped away by cruelty or ignorance. The final notes rang out across Lincoln Center like a declaration. I was always here. You just weren't looking. The standing ovation lasted 7 minutes. Backstage, Maria hugged Sophia tight. The Manhattan School of Music had offered her a full professorship. The New York Times Review called her performance a masterclass in resilience and artistry. Recording contracts waited on her piano at home. But the real victory was simpler than fame or fortune. She was finally, completely, unapologetically herself. Maria had learned something that night in the penthouse, something she wanted everyone to understand. Your worth isn't determined by how others see you. It's revealed by how courageously you show up as yourself when the moment demands it. Talent doesn't care about your job title, your address, or the assumptions people make. It only cares about the truth. And truth, when given the chance to speak, can change everything in a single moment. The world is full of hidden masters, janitors who could teach literature, waitresses who could run corporations, security guards who could compose symphonies. They're waiting for their moment at the piano. What talent are you hiding? What assumptions are you allowing others to make about who you are? And when your moment comes, because it will come, will you have the courage to sit down and play? Your stage is waiting. If this story moved you, subscribe for more tales of hidden potential revealed and underdogs who changed everything. Next week. The homeless man who shocked Harvard professors with his philosophy lecture. Hit that notification bell. You won't want to miss what happens when talent refuses to stay silent.
The story you heard today wasn't cleaned up. It was told exactly as it happened. At Black Voices Uncut, we believe that's the only way truth can live. If you felt something, hit like, comment, and your reaction, and subscribe. Every week, we bring you voices that refuse to be silenced.